It is a great pleasure and great fun to have you here today, Jon.
Thank you.
Want to begin topic, as you know, is leveraging fame as a weapon for good. And what you've done over the years is just amazing, whether it's fundraising for cancer research, both Sloan Kettering and also the T.J. Martell Foundation, helping education programs, the Two River Theater, school uniforms, playgrounds, helping out in numerous cities, Denver, Dallas, Detroit, New Orleans, Houma, Louisiana, helping Oprah. We'll get to that in a moment. And now you're focusing primarily on Philadelphia. So the first question comes up is, how did you get involved? And then how did you leverage it in a way that made a real difference? So you're unusual. Well, oftentimes in entertainment, we read about entertainers, but it's maybe titillating, but it's not the kind of thing that is edifying. When we read about you, it's either great entertainment or great philanthropy, highly unusual. So how did it come to pass?
Well, it's very kind, thank you. First of all, thank you for having me here. I feel a little out of my element, but I do appreciate it nonetheless.
Believe me, I'm as scared as you are.
You know, I think that because of my profession, people perceive the cliche of being a rock and roll star as someone who is so self-serving and only self-serving. Maybe in my youth, I was single-minded and I wanted success in the field that I chose. But as I got older and hopefully wiser, our philanthropic desires grew. And really, when the focus of it came to be, it was under the guise of sports ownership. And it really had nothing to do with what I did on the stage. But in order to differentiate my little arena football team from what I perceived as the big four, baseball, basketball, football, and hockey in Philadelphia, we needed to be philanthropic. And initially it was a Robin Hood approach to things, which was to ask who needs what and write them a check. Until one day I realized, looking out the window of a hotel I was staying in, that there was a homeless man sleeping on the street. And I didn't know if he was young or old. I didn't know if he was a Republican or a Democrat. I just knew that it was something that I could help, something that we could really make a difference in. And I didn't need a scientist to create the cure. And so I started to seek out partners who were wiser, more experienced than I. And we focused on the idea of housing, which in turn led to what we call now the For-Purpose Restaurant. And with time, we've built 330 houses and we have a restaurant. So if that's, I think we're making a dent. But what we're doing ultimately at the foundation is realizing that I'm smart enough to know what I don't know, and I know how to engage people, and I know how to include them in what it is that we're doing, and how the power of we makes that difference.
So how did you, all the activities one can get involved in, was it just seeing that individual that said, okay, this is where I'm going to focus?
I think that, you know, every cause is a good one. People dedicate their lives to one cause, and they can and do make differences. Others of us have found something a little more general, and in this case, like I said, was homelessness, simply because it appealed to me. I didn't need the scientists to create that cure. Yeah, and I felt that in Philadelphia, where I met my mentor, a lady by the name of Sister Mary Scullion, who was an expert in the field, and she taught me very methodically how we could make that difference. So leveraging my spotlight on someone with all that experience makes for 1 and 1 is 3.
Now, when you decide that you're going to try to do something, how did you find Sister Scullion? How do you, since you have fame, how people, human nature being what it is, are going to try to use you? How do you filter, this is real, this isn't real, this is something I can trust, this is something that will be mutually beneficial, not find that you end up with nothing?
Trial and error. I mean, in truth, you know, there are some big name non-for-profits that aren't as good as some of the smaller ones that just don't have the opportunities to shine. And Sister Mary was vetted by our team and those who knew of her in Philadelphia. And then we did our research. And then, of course, it's gut instinct. You meet somebody and you're moved by them, and their track record already spoke for itself. So when I met Sister Mary, and she's referenced in that song, who's We Weren't Born to Follow, as the nun, and I say, this one's about the one who cusses and spits. And Sister Mary will look you right in the eye and she'd say, I don't spit. You know? But she's not afraid to wield a big stick and cuss anyone out who's going to stop her from her mission. But it's great because in a cute and kind of a way that we leverage our relationship, it's cute to see the rock star and the nun, but in truth, my spotlight and her education has brought a lot of focus, and we continue to make a difference.
When you travel around, you often drop in on shelters and the like.
Yeah.
Is there advanced work in that, or is it spur of the moment? How do you do it in a way where you're helping the cause and people realize this is for real? You're not.
Well, I like to think that maybe our track record is starting to speak for itself. This isn't a new foundation. We're 6 years officially. We've built 330 houses, and this restaurant is a full-time endeavor. But when we began on my last tour, which is over 2 years ago now, on my days off, we dedicated a day here and there, coast to coast, going to various shelters, initially to be educated on the subject of homelessness and to find out from the youth what it is they needed, how it was that we could help them get it, and the things that we learned and I was able to ultimately take back to Washington and a position on the President's Council for Community Solutions was people that were out of the Beltway could realize that a kid in Nashville who can't get something as simple as identification because he's been thrown out of his home years ago, can't get a job. And these kind of simple errors that nobody's going to walk that young man or lady into the hospital to get their birth records. It's difficult. All these kind of things compounded led to what became this Council on Community Solutions. We gave our recommendations even in Washington, but I went coast to coast and sat down and spoke to hundreds of kids, nationwide, and would leave something. What do you need? You need a kitchen, you need bookshelves, you need clothes, and the foundation would make donations as we went along.
What struck you when you talked to all of these kids? It's one thing to read a white paper.
Yeah.
After they get over the starstruckness, whatever. What did you learn from them that was enable you to say, I'm adding that extra value that those standing on the side could not possibly know?
In truth, many of them needed a chance. Many of them asked for a mentor, an opportunity. They don't want to hear about tomorrow. They were ready to work today. And sometimes they just needed a warm, safe place to sleep and a good meal in their belly where they weren't fearful of a shelter that could be, intimidating. They were afraid to seek help in a covenant house because they thought that they could beat the street. There was a lot of that. There was continuing education and opportunity for job placement. Even when we were given the task of finding opportunity employments with big corporations, kids don't really always want to just an entry-level position. They want something that they can grow in. And in this day and age, at least where I'm at in my life, I'm not as tech savvy as even my children are. So when you go to these young startup companies who are a part of that, they want to engage these young men and women, and the young women and men also feel it's a sexy job that they can grow with and into. And we hooked up those opportunities around the country and even here in New York City.
In talking to these kids, there's, as you know, a lot of concern about especially inner city schools, that they're failing the kids. But then in talking about tech savvy, they know how to use a handheld.
Yeah.
Do you feel that even though the test scores wouldn't reflect it, there's a lot of intellectual capital there that could flourish?
And their capital is in their life's experiences. They haven't always been pretty, but that street savvy is something that, at least for me, was the difference maker between who I became and who the guy next to me was. Because if you're a scrapper, who are ultimately going to learn to win the fight. You know, I'm not saying that this was every kid in every shelter, because there are those you can't save or fix, but quite a few that I've really felt that just needed that opportunity. And we witnessed it in culinary programs in Louisiana. I witnessed it in Seattle, you know, in a multitude of places.
And in building these houses over the years, you really started getting involved in this in the 90s, didn't you?
In earnest, I mean, in true earnest, it was 2005 before I was fully committed to the idea. It wasn't as though I was 100% involved in what became our foundation in earnest until 2005.
But you've been doing things before 2000.
Sure, here and there, like a lot of people who are asked and are compassionate, but you're not dedicating resources, time, your family, you know, the efforts of everything you are, as we are now. But that's the difference between being a young man figuring out who you want to be and being a man who's come of age, who wants to leave a legacy of who he has been and who he will, you know, continue to be.
You talk about one soul at a time, and with housing, one house at a time.
Yeah.
Over the years, what lessons there have you learned in terms of, okay, we build a house, what is effective, what's likely to have an impact, positive impact, or it's not going to make the kind of impression you want it to make?
I'll tell you two stories there. When we began building houses, and you see a little clip there in Philadelphia where we built our first cluster of 5 houses. And they were row homes, and you know old Philadelphia, northern Philadelphia, and they were all row homes. And Sister Mary walked me down the block, and she said, "It'd be really great if you guys could have enough money to refurbish one of these homes." And the block was really run down, and some of the neighbors were struggling to maintain the aesthetic of their property and dealing with the tragedy of what inner city Philadelphia, like Detroit and many other cities, had become. And I said, "How much would it cost to do the whole block?" And she laughed, and I said, "No, I'm serious. How much would it cost to do the block?" Because I knew that, like the Pied Piper, if I could get enough money to fix that block, the pride in the rest of that neighborhood to move the bad guy to the next block, to the next block, to the next block. When we officially launched the foundation, talk about utilizing celebrity, President Clinton himself came and launched the foundation on those streets. And when we did that, there was a lady named Helen Brown, and she was out there, and she's a wonderful elderly lady, a big, strong lady who'd been born and raised in the neighborhood. She was sweeping the streets and keeping her front stoop clean, but knowing the rest of the neighborhood was difficult. And I said, "You know, Mrs. Brown, you're doing such a nice job there." I said, "You know, but that broom, you know, what are you doing with that one little broom?" And she held up the stick, and she says, "I'm making a difference with it," because she was keeping the bad guys away from her stoop. And in turn, I've gone back there now six good years later, since the completion of those 15 row homes. And the block looks great, and the neighbors have pride in what they're doing, and they have job training opportunities and service providing opportunities that so many others, we all team up, and it's deep, big hearts, you know, deep pockets with big hearts. Comcast and the Roberts family, and you know, there's a lot of people in Philadelphia who care very much about Sister Mary's mission, and everybody does their part to make a difference.
And is that then how you measure effectiveness? You do something, then you go back and see that it worked.
I think that helps, and on a more minute level, we have what we now call a for-purpose restaurant. I think this model is very, very unique, and the model is such that
This, by the way, is a kitchen like no others. You don't go there and just get something. Explain what gave you the idea and how you applied it.
After the housing bubble, grants were drying up and opportunities were drying up, and we had sort of hit a bump in the road. And my wife and I, Dorothea and I, were watching Brian Williams on the news, and he had a Making a Difference segment. And there was a restaurant in Salt Lake that provided basic nutrients along with a full menu. And so the restaurant was called One World, Everyone Eats. And the idea was simply that if you're hungry, come on in, we'll give you this, and then everyone else can pay over here. And so Sister Mary and Mimi Box, the head of our foundation, and my wife Dorothea flew out, did some research, and Dorothea said, you know, this is the next step for the foundation. I said, yeah, it makes perfect sense. So we went back to where we live in New Jersey, and both figuratively and literally at the crossroads where the train tracks cross, bringing these communities together. We started in a church basement, and there was a stigma attached to that. Some people came and they had the pleasure of a great meal, and they had to volunteer in order to earn that meal. Others were meant to come there and donate what they could, and that was the terminology we used. Lessons were learned, stigmas were attached. We moved down the same street to a place called Lunch Break, which is a soup kitchen. A whole nother set of stigmas attached to that. It looks very institutional. Nobody feels very comfortable there. Very many of the population in the county will come at Christmas time or Thanksgiving and think that, you know, a donation makes them feel good, and they are making a difference, but a whole nother set of issues there. Same street. We then found our retail space, and it was a auto body shop. 3 bays, 3 cement walls, nothing else, just an eyesore in the neighborhood. And my wife, being the visionary, said, I see it. We can turn this into the Soul Kitchen. And so we built it out, and it's a beautiful, beautiful restaurant where you're served a 3-course meal, silver linens, everything. And the idea is quite simple. We bring people in who can afford to pay, and you pay. And we don't use the terminology pay what you can. There's a requested minimum donation should you choose to pay and not participate. If you cannot pay, you volunteer. If you say, I'm not a people person, I don't want to volunteer in your restaurant, that's not a problem. We'll take you to the soup kitchen, we'll take you to the food pantry, we'll take you to other nonprofits, the medical clinic, and help you help yourself, and you're granted a gift certificate. We don't call it a voucher, we call it a gift certificate. Because ultimately what we're trying to do is not only bring the community together in this for-purpose restaurant, but empower people. And there is such pride when you start to know Jimmy and James' name, you know, when you know that the ladies that are coming there walked 2 miles to get there and they worked at the clinic that day. They feel a part of something. And we had influential and affluent acquaintances of ours. And we had to even have a celebrity chef come in on that day. And I had sat with these 25 people and the 35 people maybe. And we had an honest Q&A. And one man honestly said to me, I don't want to sit with homeless people. I said, I appreciate that statement. Thank you for being honest. And I explained to him, I said, see that guy in the kitchen? He's homeless. You'd never know it looking at him on the street. He's college educated. In fact, he went to Princeton University. True story. Another guy says, I don't want to take a table away from a homeless guy. I said, thank you for that. But without you coming to support the restaurant, how can I provide this guy with that meal? And then in turn, you're realizing we went to the day laborers that are down in front of the convenience store. You know, you've seen those situations around town. And we brought a couple of guys over and we explained the model to them. And then we paid them to wash the windows. And then we fed them our best foods. And we sat and talked to them. And through the translation, asked the question, how much money do you spend a month on food? The man says, nothing. We thought, maybe you didn't understand the question. How much money do you spend on food? He says, nothing. He says, do you think that I have the convenience of going to a restaurant? He says, I either go to the food pantry and get what they give us as an allotment. I go to the soup kitchen. He says, there's 2 or 3 families in that apartment. And all we do is eat for nutrition in order to go back out and find more work. So when you break through that mold, you meet your neighbor. You bring your neighbor in and make him feel comfortable in that environment. He meets somebody else. You never know what's going to come of it. We've had kids that were born and raised in New Jersey that we've gotten documentation for, medical assistance, job training now, pride in what they do, empowering them in what they do. The Latino community who are participating, the African American community, you wouldn't see this coalition in these restaurants in Red Bank, but you do see them at the kitchen. You know, and you can't tell who's paying, who's not paying. And it's working.
You hit on something very important in charity philanthropy, and that is we think of giving. What you hit on is there has to be a sense of reciprocity for it to really work and people feel that they're doing their part to bring themselves up. It's
important to us. You know, I'm not about entitlements. I think that we've really realized that it's about empowerment. And I can't rely solely on government, and I think we've all learned lessons that how difficult that bureaucracy can be. But in your community, I think if you do stand by the statements, one soul at a time, and it's a ripple effect.
Talking about bureaucracy, housing or anything else, it's never easy to do. What are the little things you do to grease the skids in a very way only you could do?
Well, it's a unique position, but I'm certainly willing to leverage my celebrity. If it means that I have to come and sing at your kid's bar mitzvah, I'm very available. Whatever it takes. Whatever, you know, if it's an autographed picture, or meet your nieces, or whatever, you know, whatever I can do to get what I need done. You know, that it's Sister Mary, those are my real heroes. When she's down in that alleyway the other 300 days a year that I don't see her, those are my heroes. It's the ones that are down there every day doing what it is that we do. It's not about me. We utilize my celebrity when you have to, you get to be the closer. You know.
So how do you get others involved? You've talked about the we decade versus the me decade.
Yeah.
So you're involved. How do you multiply so people say, he's doing it, hey, maybe this is something I could do that's productive?
Well, we're learning every day. I don't claim to have the book written yet, but I think first of all, the power of we, as we call it, inclusion is important. Not being judgmental, trying to lead by example, though in an imperfect manner, bringing community together. It'll make you feel good. It makes you feel good. When we leave the kitchen, we know that, you know, you feel good. And what we'll tell Bon Jovi fans, for instance, who want to come and volunteer, we tell them not to, for a number of reasons. First of all, we're too little an establishment, and you're taking away the job of somebody else who needs that to earn their meal. But also then we can tell them, do it in your community. Let us be the springboard for you. While we're writing the book, we're still figuring out every little, you know, nuance in this retail space. We're going to hope to have led by example so we could hand the book off to somebody else. I don't know that we will replicate our model nationwide. I think the opportunities are there. I think that we have the opportunity. We're going to just determine when and where to grow it.
Talking about, you mentioned President Clinton. I can't resist asking you, when you're asked, would you rather be you or president? What your very humorous answer.
Well, I've been blessed to have met the president many, many times over the years. And one day we were traveling together, and the gentleman who had provided the transportation, see how subtle I'm being about this stuff, he said, "Sir, may I ask, whose job is better, rock star or former president?" I said, "Can I answer that question?" The president said, "Well, yes, you may." I said, "Mine." And he said, "Well, why do you think that?" I said, "Because I got to keep the house and the airplane." I said, "True." But he said, "Well, for those 8 years, that was a hell of a house and a hell of an airplane."
Still having withdrawal symptoms.
Yeah.
But how do you handle the scrutiny? I mean, eyes light up when you move, and that can be a benefit, getting that thing done, doing the bar mitzvah.
Yeah.
But it can have its downsides.
Most definitely. You know, I think we've all read about foundations that weren't as transparent or maybe didn't fulfill their mission. I'd like to think that ours is, in fact, transparent. Not that I'm preaching that, you know, we are good and someone else isn't, but you have to make sure that every day you're aware of your reputation, about your mission, about disappointing yourself or others. And having a former IRS agent as the head of your foundation is good too. Mimi Box is the head of my foundation, and she scrutinizes everything I do. So all those things. I mean, we just do it for the right reason, and I think if you do it for the right reason, and you're not there to pat yourself on the back. I mean, one thing I beg her not to do is accept awards for our little foundation. I always say we're this little, because we are. I don't want pats on the back. I don't want awards. Reward enough is just doing what it is that we do. And if you do it for the purest of reason, that's accolade enough. I don't need to be any more famous. The rest of it is just what we do.
What advice then do you give to other celebrities who you think might want to do something but are fearful that they read about the checkered history and wondering if take a risk and my reputation may look like a fool because I got taken? What advice do you give to them?
I've seen some of my friends be taken advantage of. You know, there's a number of guys, we've all read about them in the paper, they're in jail because they stole foundations' monies or the best interests were not at heart. Again, I would, just like I would give the same advice to anyone in my field, have better advisors than yourself, have smarter, better, wiser men than you and women surrounding you to make you look good. Everything I do in my life, I call it the Henry Ford theory of management. It's my name, it's my ideas, but I need a whole team to implement every single one of those ideas. And then I try to surround myself with the best guys and not be taken. Granted, it doesn't always work, but I have a winning average.
Oprah this morning talked about some of the curveballs that she was hit with over the years, and she made the point, you carry on. It's leadership. You don't let it throw you off the track and say, oh, I can't do this anymore. Have there been lessons, mistakes that you've observed over the years that have held you in good stead and made you more effective as a leader and philanthropist?
Sure. The mistakes of others have always been, your greatest example of what not to do. The willingness to give of yourself on a 10 scale, a 10 every day is virtually impossible. At least it is for me. I do the best I can with what I have and in the circumstances in which I live. But I think that you just try hard. I mean, that is certainly the idea, to better yourself. If I was a single-minded, selfish guy that just wanted to be the lead singer of a rock and roll band, I think at 50 years old, it should get pretty boring, to be honest. Even though it's a glamorous position to be in, it's very hard work. What I have to do, just like anybody, is, and the buck stops here. If I don't write the song, if I don't sing good, I tell the guys that work at, on the records or in my house, I say, guys, do you understand that the little, part that you think you play is what keeps the economy going? Because if that's good, then I'm happy. And if I'm happy, then I write. And if I write, then a lot of people have jobs. And it's, it's that kind of everybody's in this together. Everybody's a living participant.
And so how do you, and then we'll get to questions from the audience, how do you, or you just sort of flow with it, combine work and philanthropy? Sometimes the songs reflect it.
Yeah, the messaging, I'd like to think that when you're writing, I like to think of our stuff as being universal, timeless, and inclusive, and then ultimately optimistic. So I have built a career on writing about optimism, reality, but optimism. If you're living that, and you're witnessing that, and you're a part of that, and you believe in that, it's easier to write. If you go out there and you tell the truth, then people want to participate in that. I don't pretend to have ever had dancers or rappers, or I am what I am, and I do what I do, and I think we do it well. But don't be anything that you're not. I learned long ago I'm smart enough to know what I don't know. There's a very short bucket list of things I have left that I have my eyes set on, that I will achieve in the next 10 years. But
you want to share them with us?
Well, this philanthropy is very important to me. I want to continue my career. I mean, to me, a role model was Sinatra. And then my other desires, I think, are pretty well known. I want to be in the NFL. It's everybody knows it, and I work hard, and someday it's going to happen,